I am Mr. Beat, and this is a live stream. You are seeing me live right now in my studio. The date is Sunday, July 7th, 2024. Thanks for being here. As always, it's just me. I'm going over Supreme Court cases that are recent. This is very recent history. In fact, dare I say, this is current events. We are looking at the most important Supreme Court cases of the 2023-2024 term. So we had a total, if you look in the description, we have a total of 62 decisions in this term. And I would say a lot of them were actually fairly important. Impactful, maybe is the better word. We don't know for sure how many of these cases are actually going to have long-term consequential effects. So that's why often when I make a video for my Supreme Court Briefs series, I like to wait at least a few years to see, okay, how important is this case really? Because I remember when what year was it? 2010, was it now? The Citizens United case went down and everybody said the sky was falling in and it was like the worst decision ever. The worst decision going back to Plessy v. Ferguson or whatever. It was bad, but I don't think it was as bad as people made it out to be at the time. And I am seeing a lot of sensationalism right now. I'm seeing a lot of people freaking out. And so part of the reason why I'm doing this stream is to put some ease into the minds of some of my viewers, at least, because I know many of you are freaking out. And in fact, as my thumbnail says, yeah, the Supreme Court straight up be flexing this term. I mean, this is the most consequential court I've seen maybe in my lifetime. John Roberts, I mean, the Roberts court has been surprising. I didn't think they would be doing so much. I thought they'd be more hands-off and more taking on more boring cases, but a lot of these cases I do think are consequential. And so I'll be going through 10 of them that I think, 10 of the 62 decisions that I think are probably the most important of all the decisions that came out, most of them announced over the last few weeks. Many of them you probably already know about, like the big two, which were announced within the last 10 days. That would be the Trump immunity case, as well as the overturning of the Chevron doctrine. And then if there are any other cases that you would like for me to bring up, I will. But I'm basically just giving you a nuts and bolts explainer version of what went down, the big question in each case, and how the court decided. I found a phenomenal website. Actually, the New York Times has been doing this the last few years. They have an interactive website that breaks down the cases really well. It also links to one of my favorite websites, which you'll see links in the description, Scotus blog. Scotus blog does a phenomenal job of making this stuff easier to digest because legalese can be confusing. And one of my goals of this channel is to break down complex Supreme Court cases into digestible forms in which anybody can understand this stuff. That's really my main goal with this entire channel, to simplify this stuff. I always end up oversimplifying, but that's okay, because I'd rather you start to at least get a grasp of this than just be so freaking overwhelmed and just ignore it because you're so overwhelmed because you don't understand any of it. So I'm hoping that at least some of this you'll understand. And then, yeah, I'll be checking it. Thanks, Ricky, Ticky, Bobby, Wobbin. I am now of the opinion, on the record, I think that the Congress should expand the courts. I think FDR was right. This is now how you do it is another question. I think it should be over a long period of time so that it's less political. But I think that I am definitely on board with this. And thanks for the super chat. But before I start digging into these cases, I will say I usually am one of the first people to defend the Supreme Court. I know that this is the branch that the judicial branch as a whole is the branch of the federal government, especially, that tends to be the most educated and most has the most pragmatic views in terms of the law. They are obviously, all of them are biased. Every human being is biased. I keep saying this over and over, myself included, but they tend to at least try to avoid being biased. And they generally try to avoid being ideological. This time around, it was much more ideological. 2024, I haven't seen a Supreme Court this ideological, maybe ever. And that's not just hyperbole. I'm not exaggerating here. I just think that there are some in particular who have become very ideological, or at the very least partisan. Maybe partisan is the better term. They make it more about wins and losses for people that have the same political views as them. And the two most guilty of this, I think, are Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Samuel Alito. I think that, they've been very disappointing. These two have been very disappointing. I think they're two of the worst Supreme Court justices in American history. This is my opinion. Now, you already saw my worst 10 list out, but both of them have received gifts, donations, bribes, you could call them. I would call them bribes. Yeah, I would call them bribes. And we've seen them, as they've gotten older, become more and more partisan, more and more about like, well, will this help my team? Will this help people that share my political views? Then yes, I'll go with it. Now, on the flip side, I want to defend another justice who has actually been surprisingly pretty decent. Do you know who I'm going to say? Can you take a guess? It's not Neil Gorsuch. Neil Gorsuch he surprises me too sometimes. He's actually way better than Thomas and Alito. But no, any guess? Oh, Kavanaugh is another wonderful guess. But no, it is her, Amy Coney Barrett, ACB. This year in particular, I've read some of her opinions, and it's been refreshing to see that she actually has more nuanced views and, more importantly, pragmatic views on certain issues. Now, she still clearly leans to the right politically. That's okay. But she seems to be more in the real world and less partisan than some of the other right-leaning justices. And if you don't know this already, yeah, there are clearly right now, of the 9 justices, 6 of them lean to the right. It's pretty evident at this point. And 3 of them lean to the left. So it's a very, quote, conservative group that we have right now. And that's why a lot of people are very upset, and why a lot of people are voting for president this November strictly on this issue, strictly to vote for a president who will give them Supreme Court justices that lean to the left. Now, remember, the Senate has to approve of all nominations of justices by the president. So they would have to win the Senate too. But regardless, this has become such a political, this has become such an electoral issue, I should say, because of just all of the partisanship, the apparent partisanship we have seen from this current Supreme Court. And they have really been, they have really been busy. Like I said at the beginning of this, 62 decisions this term. But it's not really the number, it's the quality of these cases. The New York Times has a wonderful website. Like I said, this is the interactive website, webpage. I've linked it in the description, where they break them all down. You see by category. These are the major categories that were covered in this term. So we're going to discuss the immunity case first, and then also right after that, the other big one, the reversal of Chevron, the Chevron doctrine. And then I'm going to go through 8 others that I think are important. And then I'm going to start looking at your suggestions for the rest. So before we do that, I saw some more super chats. I'll try to get the kind of sprinkle these in. Thank you very much, Julian. Is any of this going to be on the next test? No, there is no test. And by the way, thanks for coming to summer school. I'm delighted you're here when you don't have to be. I'm not taking attendance. Thank you, Julian. Christian, thank you. Would love to see another collab with Logging Through History on the arguments for and against the Electoral College, as you have opposing views. I feel like now is a better time than ever. Okay, duly noted. I will reach out to him and we will make it happen. He does a lot of traveling in the summer, so we probably would do it more likely September, October, I'm thinking. But yes, I love the suggestion, and thank you for the super chat. How about reduce the Supreme Court to 1 justice? Tommy, I appreciate the super chat, but I disagree with that sentiment. I think you need a team of people. In fact, I would argue that 1 person as president these days, I think that's overrated as well. I think there needs to be probably a council instead of 1 person, 1 president. And I know that's weird to hear from the president's guy on YouTube, the guy who makes more videos about American presidents than probably, arguably, any other creator on this platform. But yeah, I think the presidency has too much. The president has too much power. We need to break it down, break it up. I know, it's weird. How often? Oh wait, SI vlog. Good to see you here. Yeah, long-time viewer of the channel. I've always appreciated your support. How often do SCOTUS justices recuse themselves from a case? I would say it's not very often these days. Historically, it was more common back in the day. I would say per term, you see it happen at least once or twice. Often you see it these days when it's just strictly because there's a newbie in there. There's a new justice, like, for example, Brown Jackson got in there and she didn't hear the oral arguments from some cases when she first got in a couple of years ago. And so she did not decide because she was not there for oral arguments. So, but it does happen, just not very often anymore. Brandon, thank you. Hey, Mr. Beast. Stop it. How do we keep the court unbiased? You don't. You absolutely don't. Or how do we incorporate the court's biases into our checks and balance system? So this is why this is an argument for expanding the court, in my opinion. This is also an argument for making the court itself less powerful. Although to do that, I think you need to strengthen local courts and state courts, and even the federal district courts, appellate courts. I think those all need to be strengthened as well in order to weaken this. But the Supreme Court has become incredibly powerful. It's more powerful now in 2024 than it ever has been in the 248-year-long history of the country. So that's what I suggest. What is your opinion on how this will affect Trump? All of these cases have been a net positive for Trump. They have helped him. It doesn't mean that his charges are going away. I still think he's going to get in trouble. I still think he's going to face some consequences here. But all of these cases have been a net positive for him and the Republican Party. And thank you, E. Green. Jordan Knobs. Switzerland has a council of 7 made up of members of the largest 4 parties as the top executive, and I'm very happy with it. Yes, I am familiar with, I'm somewhat familiar with how they do it in Switzerland. And I've heard and read good things as well. So I'm glad you like it. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Harrison, good to see you. New PFP. I'm digging it. Cynical historian was angry on Twitter about Trump immunity ruling. I saw that. He was irate. He was very loudly against it. I know you and him have similar views, so I'm curious to hear your opinion. I will get into that shortly, Harrison. Thanks for the super chat. And finally, we've got... I don't know how to pronounce that, but during these uncertain times and being a young person during this mess, I really do appreciate having your guiding hand to ease our minds through it. Well, it's an honor. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for the kind words. And I'm glad that you have that confidence in me. That means a lot. I will say that as a 42-year-old man, an elder millennial, these are dark times we are living through right now. No doubt. It's naive. It's a bit... I think people that deny that are a little bit in denial. They're just in denial in general. You can't deny that these are dark times overall because of what's been happening with the federal government in particular, although there are some bright spots at the local level, I would say, different states. However, I think it's just a rough stretch. We're forgetting that history is just full of ups and downs, and usually it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes, though, it's 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. So we may even go backwards. I mean, it kind of feels in some ways like, to me, the late 1800s, early 1900s, in some ways, in terms of how the Supreme Court has been ruling and some of the cultural trends we've seen with people being more comfortable with authoritarianism again. However, I do still think firmly that the vast majority of Americans are against authoritarianism. And I think this is just a rough patch we have to get through. So stay hopeful. I don't think if those who study history tend to be a little bit more optimistic, actually. However, listen to people that study history in terms of like what's going on, because there are history rhymes. Remember, it doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And there are patterns. I will say that, like, worldwide, there seems to be a trend right now of people like being more sympathetic to demagogues and authoritarian-leaning politicians because they are promising things that people want or they think they want. We saw this in the 1920s a lot. 100 years ago, we saw this stuff a lot, especially the 1930s. And you need to remember the reason why. In the 1920s into the 1930s, what was happening worldwide? A major depression, arguably the worst depression in world history, or at least modern world history, we should say, modern world history, the last 500 years at least. What we are seeing right now currently around the world is we've seen economic growth slow, but more importantly, we've seen wealth concentration get smaller into the hands of a smaller group of people. We have less parity in terms of wealth distribution. We need more wealth distribution all over the place. Okay, it's better for everyone. Rich people are better off when more people have more money. And we've seen inflation get out of control over the past 4 years. That has been something that has led a lot of people down extremism paths. And that's kind of explains a lot of why people are turning to more extreme ideologies and politicians. So it's not like this is a surprise. If you've studied history, you see this. If people are desperate economically, if there's increased scarcity, and if people lose hope, most importantly, they lose hope in the future of their own economic prosperity, a lot of times they will turn to more extreme ideologies and politicians. So I'm getting off track here, but let's get back to this, okay? Oh, I got some more super chats, though. I got to make sure I get these before I move on. Would you say something like the directory from French Revolution would work for the U.S.? A 5-man committee to... yeah, no, totally. That's what I was kind of hinting at. Something like that would definitely... Now, there's other things you'd have to change as well along with that, but I won't get into that. Christian, thank you. Watching this while working out at the gym, really. Today's goals include learning something new and getting buff like Mr. B. Well, thank you. Shout out from Michigan. Ever think about doing an election night stream with vlogging through history, Mr. Terry and other people? It's crossed my mind. I kind of just like to watch, though. Maybe I'll be a guest on someone's live stream. I just feel like it's too stressful to kind of do in real time. I don't know. I'll think about it. Thanks for suggesting it. Kyle, thank you. Have you kept up with the French election? The far right lost, even though they were heavily favored to win. Yeah, so I've been keeping track of it today. Are all the results in? I haven't seen all the results of the election here. Yeah, it says, so according to, well, let's go to the New York Times as well here. French election yields deadlock as left surges and far right comes up short. The outcome left no party with an absolute majority, and France bracing for potential political paralysis. Oh, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? We've had political paralysis in the United States for the last 15 years. So yeah, definitely there are parallels. Callan, thank you. What are your thoughts on synergy of presidential official act immunity and aspiring autocrat using emergency powers? Protect Our Democracy Act. I've heard of it. There's also an amendment going around now, but I'll get into that in a moment. Hoping to hear your take on the ID abortion case. Okay. I will keep that in mind. I'll write it down so I don't forget. I'm not sure what case that is. If you can give me the name of the case, that helps. Also, but thank you, Jenny. And finally, Nick, what features of the Supreme Court make it necessary? Isn't it paradoxical to democracy that our policies can be determined by unelected officials? Oh, you need unelected officials. You absolutely need unelected officials in there. Oh, my goodness. It's not paradoxical at all. We are not a pure democracy. We are not. We do not want to be a pure democracy. That would be bad. That would be very, very bad. We want a representative democracy. We need something, some kind of buffer between pure democracy and, you know, like, so that's why, I mean, it's not perfect. Representative democracies are never perfect, but at least we have to prevent the tyranny of the majority, which can happen. Now, in my view, tyranny of the majority is less of a threat now. Tyranny of the minority is more of a threat now, which is why I call for things like reforming or even abolishing the Electoral College. But yeah, like that's the short answer to that, Nick. I could have a long answer, but I want to get into these cases here. So the first case we're going to look at is the immunity for former presidents and also current presidents. The case that got probably the most attention in the media, Trump v. United States. So again, this is from the New York Times interactive site. So I'll just kind of give you the highlights of what happened. And I might just read some of this too, just to make sure I don't say anything wrong. I've looked at this whole thing earlier. So, but the 6-3 ruling on, this is the very last one they ruled on. This was, and I actually reacted to this live on Twitch exclusively on Monday, last Monday when they announced it. So I've since had time to look at more, like I read more of the decision. And my first instinct was like, okay, this isn't good, but it could have been worse. Now my instinct is, okay, this is pretty bad. This is, and you may have seen that Legal Eagle released a video about this, this case. However, I think he's also one of the many YouTubers who have been a bit sensationalist with this. I think they are, I mean, the whole line about in the dissent from Justice Sotomayor saying that this is you know, now the president can be a king, I think is a bit of a stretch. However, this decision, I think, has led to chaos. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let me go back. So there are precedents of presidential immunity. So in 1974, the case United States v. Nixon, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that President Richard Nixon, then still in office, had to comply with a subpoena seeking tapes of his conversations, rejecting his claims of executive privilege. I made a video about that if you want to learn more about that. Oh, yeah, let me first go back. The Supreme Court ruled that former President Donald Trump is partially immune from prosecution on charges that he plotted to subvert the 2020 election. The justices returned the case to the lower courts for additional analysis, saying that the president may be prosecuted for private conduct, but not official acts. So this was a 6-3. You know, the 6 right-leaning justices ruled in favor of Trump, at least partially. The 3 left-leaning justices ruled against him. When we say partially, we mean that for official acts, the president can be immune from official acts. What does official acts mean? Define official acts. Nobody knows. This is something that courts have to decide. And that seems like chaos, right? That seems like a mess. But then private conduct, which I think a lot of the stuff that he was doing you know, like all the election denial stuff, a lot of this was private, you know, like calling up the Georgia, the governor of Georgia and all these leaders and Georgia to try to subvert the 2020 election. I think that, in my opinion, is private conduct, not official acts. And so this is not over. This case is not over. All these cases are not over, I should say, because this is talking about specifically the the fake electors scheme. I mean, remember, there are lots of different charges against Trump, and a lot of them you can lump them together in the same basket. They're basically the 2020 election subversion crimes, alleged crimes, and so that would all fall into this category as well. But yeah, so the precedent also, Nixon in 1982, Nixon v. Fitzgerald, a closely divided court ruled that Nixon, by then out of office, was absolutely immune from civil lawsuits. Okay, so he was immune from being sued from people, basically. And other than that, not really much to go off of. It does say that in 2020, the Supreme Court ruled by a 7-2 vote in Trump v. Vance that Trump had no absolute right to block the release of his financial records. I remember that case. It says no citizen, not even the president, is categorically above the common duty to produce evidence when called upon in a criminal proceeding. So the bottom line is, though, this does make it so that is the president can get away with more. Now, the president already has got away with more. If you want to look at the role of commander-in-chief, being a commander-in-chief, Congress has essentially given the president a lot of freedom to carry out the so-called war on terrorism. Ever since right after 9/11, the National Defense Authorization Act that gets renewed every year like clockwork. Congress easily reapproves of it, which means they're essentially giving the president whatever resources he needs to combat terrorism. Most of that continues today in the form of drone attacks or small missions, not all-out warfare. But a lot of people don't understand that we've been at war constantly since 9/11 in the name of fighting terrorism. And the war on terrorism is not over. It is ongoing. If you've ever heard someone say, oh, the war on terrorism is over, because remember, we withdrew our forces. American forces came home in Afghanistan back in 2021. No, no, it still goes on around the world. You'd be surprised where some Marines are currently fighting terrorism. I keep saying so-called terrorism because it's definitely subjective what you define as terrorism. And many people have called American troops terrorists as well. So it's important to understand that there are other perspectives of what the word terrorism means in terms of warfare. But regardless, the president now seems to be justified as far as getting away with, you know, arguably war crimes. You know, you can make the argument that every president since Franklin Roosevelt is a war criminal. Maybe not Jimmy Carter, Jimmy Carter even too, though. You can make an argument. So, like, I guess that's maybe what the majority thought with this ruling. But at the other side of it is, okay, where does this stop? Because the president could just, you know, say, oh, I'm going to do anything I want in the name of national security. Does that mean like assassinating a political opponent? I mean, to me, a lot of this stuff is a slippery slope. I think the sensationalism has been like, oh, the president can just do whatever the heck they want in the name of security. I don't think that's how judges are going to interpret this. I don't think you need to worry about this. I do think most Americans, though, are worrying about this. If you look at the down here, it says, where does the public stand? This is linked to that aforementioned website, SCOTUS blog. Or no, SCOTUS poll. It's a different website, I guess. But what they do is this website. Let's see if I can open it up here. So they poll people. This is through Harvard. They poll people what they think as far as what the results should be. And if you look at the results, 74% of Americans, according to this poll through Harvard, think that former presidents are not immune from criminal prosecution for actions they took while being president. And 27% think former presidents can be immune. So that's, I'm sure most of you also would be with that majority. That's me as well. I think that the court got it wrong here, even for official actions. That's just my opinion. All right, so thanks for clarifying that, Jenny. I'll write that down. Moyle v. U.S. Hey, Stephen. Good to see you here. Thank you. I've heard a lot about Project 2024. Isn't it Project 2025? Isn't that what it's called? It troubles me, but what are your thoughts? From what I've seen, it's basically a bunch of Christian nationalists coming up with a framework for President Trump if he were to get reelected. It doesn't mean that President Trump would implement it. However, a lot of people are afraid that he will. Just a couple of days ago, I think Trump truth socialed that he would not, that he did not approve of Project 2025. But, you know, President Trump does not have a history of telling the truth. So it's hard to know if he's telling the truth. I don't necessarily believe anything he says. No offense. Like if somebody lies to me all the time, I mean, any politician I'm skeptical of, but especially him, because I just don't know. I think a lot of times he says what people want to hear in the moment. So we'll see. However, if people are wanting me to make a video about this, I'm doing a podcast about this in the near future. So stand by and stand down for more details. Did you get that reference? The Story of Us podcast. It will be on that. Okay, YOLO. Shout out from your high school friend, Brian. Hope you enjoyed the free truck from Ozfest. Oh, holy crap. Brian. How you doing? Blast from the past. Heck yeah. Reach out to me privately, Brian. Good to hear from you. I think we're Facebook friends still. Okay. Chicklet. My question for this ruling is, what does this solve? It doesn't really solve anything. All it does is lead to more chaos. It leads to basically kicking the can down the road. I think that I especially think Alito and Thomas were just like, okay, we just want to delay this case because we want Trump back in there. And so this almost undoubtedly lead to this case being dragged out for a long time, much longer than it would have been otherwise. But it's going to lead to chaos. And they did not set a standard. There was no test like the Brandenburg test that we have from the Brandenburg v. Ohio. There's no test that we can clearly refer to with this decision that says, hey, this is an official act by the president. They did not lay it out in a clear and concise way. It's too vague. And so we're just left with confusion and panic, and we don't know what's going to happen. And so I predict that they're going to come back to this issue, the immunity issue, in a future case, probably as early as next year. But I don't know. It's going to lead to a lot of chaos. Yeah, this is definitely a bad decision. One of the worst in many years. Oh, still alive. Good to see you. Yes, I have. Yes. I might as well tell you, me and Dr. Lichtman are doing a live stream here in the near future. He also now has a YouTube channel that he does live streams all the time. He is amazing. Him and I are both going to predict who we think will be the president. He's still basically saying Biden, but now that there could be a new candidate, people are talking about this. He's adjusted his views slightly, but yeah, he's a very knowledgeable dude. Sean, thank you. I think we should revisit Lochner, revisit economic substantive due process. Glad Chevron overturned too much regulatory capture. Thoughts? Okay, well, let's talk about that one next. Yeah, let's bring it up next. So the other case that was huge all over the news that people were freaking out about, this was the one that I was freaking out more, is Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo. And then it looks like they lumped in another case here on the New York Times site, Relentless v. Department of Commerce. Okay, so just to read the details of this case. The court reduced the power of federal agencies by overruling a foundational 1984 precedent. That ruling, Chevron v. Natural Resources Defense Council, required courts to defer to agencies' reasonable interpretations of ambiguous statutes. Is there a major precedent involved? Yes, the Chevron is one of the most cited cases in American law. Are there recent rulings on the subject? Chevron fell out of favor at the Supreme Court in recent years, with several justices criticizing it. The court, which had invoked Chevron at least 70 times to decide cases, has not done so since 2016. What was at stake? The decision threatens regulations on the environment, healthcare, consumer safety, nuclear energy, government benefit programs, and guns. It also shifts power from agencies to Congress and to judges. Looks like the public is more split on this issue. I tweeted about this one saying this is one of the worst decisions in American history. I was really upset about it. It essentially makes it so that the executive branch cannot function like it was meant to, because now you're going to have politicians deciding things instead of experts in their fields. That was my first reaction. However, I heard a lot of counter arguments, and now my views are more nuanced. And maybe I'm thinking, maybe this won't be a bad thing. Maybe I overreacted. We don't know yet how bad this is going to be. I think it's unclear. I think that if I want to be less cynical, maybe this is going to lead to a new golden age of Congress actually getting their crap together and not being dysfunctional anymore. And now Congress is going to pass laws where they list out everything specifically, and there's no confusion as far as what needs to be done to carry out the law, because that's really what the Chevron doctrine did back in the early 1980s. It said, hey, there's a lot of stuff that Congress doesn't know what they're talking about. So we're going to give that trust and authority to these federal agencies within the executive branch, such as the Environmental Protection Agency. It's a famous one. To the experts in their fields there know what they're doing. Critics, though, would say, well, this just leads to a bloated and inefficient government, and it takes away power from the legislative branch. It weakens the Congress, which, yeah, obviously. The other thing is that, now judges will have more say on a lot of this stuff. So there'll be more lawsuits as opposed to regulations. In my view, I think it is possible for Congress to get its crap together and write better laws that actually effectively set up a playbook for the executive branch to enforce these laws. I'm still skeptical of that, but maybe this will lead to a smaller bureaucracy, because that's the biggest criticism, is that the executive branch has become so bloated. We got over 3 million people working in the executive branch in D.C. A lot of them make really good money. However, I think most of them are boring pencil pushers. They're boring, dorky types like myself who are not power hungry. I firmly, sincerely believe that. And so another thing we forget, I should really stress on it. It's this is an important point. I meant to say this earlier. When we think of checks and balances, the idea that you don't want one part of the federal government in the United States to become too powerful. And so you have a bunch of parts of the federal government that are constantly attacking each other in order to reduce the power of each other. And the idea is that one part of the federal government doesn't get too powerful because they're all constantly, undermining each other. And typically the way we're taught this in school, like when I taught it to my government students, the government class in high school, I taught them, hey, we have 3 branches of government. You got the legislative, executive, and judicial, and all 3 check the power of each other. And so, for example, the legislative branch can check the power of the executive and judicial branch through the power of impeachment. However, I also went on when I taught this to say, hey, there's also checks and balances within each branch of government. So, for example, in the legislative branch, you have 2 branches of government. You have the Senate and you have the House of Representatives, and they are constantly battling, constantly compromising, constantly fighting in order to pass legislation or fighting over how the money gets spent. People forget that in the executive branch, you also have checks and balances. You have different departments. You have basically what we call, for lack of a better way to put it, the deep state is a separate entity from the president and vice president and cabinet. You have all these government agencies, all of the departments. To assume that all of them all get along is incredibly ignorant and naive about how the government works. I always bring up the example of the FBI and the CIA. These are 2 government organizations within the executive branch, but infamously, like notoriously, have not got along. Okay, you have different departments within the executive branch. They don't get along. They are all fighting mostly over resources because first and foremost, they care about what their department does. And so you have all these checks and balances within the executive branch. And so when we're talking about the 2 most important cases of this this term in the Supreme Court, the 2 most important decisions dealt with the power of the executive branch. And there's 2 main branches within the executive branch. You got the commander-in-chief side, the one who actually carries out the laws. Think of them as the lead police officer. The president is in charge of the military. They're the ones sending troops around the world. They're the ones that are the top boss over all of the generals and all the military, all branches of government, the enforcers. But people forget that that's not the same part of the executive branch as the deep state in terms of the bureaucracy, the ones who yeah, they're enforcing the law too, but this is not the military. These are the pencil pushers. These are the ones who go out and audit. These are the ones who budget, accounting, carrying out very often mundane tasks that government does, like the Department of Energy, the Department of the Interior, like running the national parks. Okay, we don't think of the president with their military marching into the national parks to make sure people are picking up their trash and not leaving out stuff for the bears. I always lump them into 2 main categories within the executive branch. You basically have the military-related part of the executive branch, and then you have the administrative state, for a lack of a better way of putting it. People call that the deep state. I think that's kind of a misleading phrase. It's become a weaponized phrase, and I'm going to make a video about this. But essentially, this Supreme Court is so bad that what they did is they extremely strengthened the power of the executive branch by giving the executive branch way more immunity. The part of the executive branch that we don't want any immunity at all, because that is the part of the executive branch that has the military, that has nuclear weapons. They strengthened that part of the executive branch, but they weakened the part of the executive branch that doesn't. Okay, yeah, the Department of Energy, they're supposed to manage the nuke. Well, guess who actually has the final authority of launching nukes? It's the president. It's the generals, okay? So we're talking about the bureaucracy, the administrative state that is now weakened. Okay, fine. I'm actually kind of cool with that. I mean, I'm libertarian leaning. I get it. Very inefficient. Hurts this country in many ways. But you also simultaneously, this Supreme Court, this same 6-3 majority, increased the power of the presidency. The part of the executive branch that has all the weapons that can actually do destruction. So I want you to really think about that. That's it in a nutshell. They literally did the worst of both worlds. That's what the Supreme Court did. So that's why I argue this is one of the worst Supreme Court terms in American history. I'm not exaggerating, okay? I've been studying the Supreme Court for a while. This is, again, my opinion, but that's why these two cases are making, if you're understanding why people are so upset by those two cases, okay, both the Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo, the one that overturned the Chevron doctrine, and the Trump immunity case, the Trump v. United States. Those are the two ones that have got everybody more upset than I've seen since the Jackson v. Dobbs decision a couple years back. Those three decisions alone, I think that has led you, if you're not really paying attention to politics, there are millions of Americans that are literally voting for the president based on those three Supreme Court decisions and nothing else. They don't care if they're voting for, if it's Biden who is, you know, barely keeping with it. He's you know, they would vote for his dead body over Trump at this point because they think they are voting for a Supreme Court, which in many ways, yeah, the president appoints these justices. The Senate has to approve of them, but I get it. People are essentially voting for the Supreme Court justices at this point. All right, my rant's over. We're going to get into the rest of these cases, which are still important, but not as important as big two. I mean, see, Jennifer kind of sums it up right there. Yeah, I think so, Carlo. Not surprising. I didn't think that they keep calling it the far right. I call it the populist right. I didn't think they were going to be able to pull it off. So not too surprising for me, but I don't know a whole lot about French politics. So, okay, I'm going to go back to Super Chats. I need to catch up on these. Indu, thank you. Should or could Biden have expanded the court size when he had a trifecta in the 21-23 period? Anyway, love your channel. It's crazy. It's already been a year. Now, remember, he barely had a trifecta. He barely had it. And thank you very much, Indu, by the way. Remember, he had a couple members in the Senate who were often voting with Republicans or at least sympathetic to them. And so they kind of held his back his agenda. So I don't think it would have, he probably should have tried, but I don't think he would have had a chance. It's good. Oh, you're making me feel better with your PFP there. How do you think it would play out if Trump wins, but the Dems hold the Senate and Supreme Court vacancies occur early on in his term? Yeah, I think this is something a lot of people are not bringing up enough. I do think that, you know, it is very likely that Trump could win the presidency, but the Democrats could win Congress, especially the House of Representatives, for sure. And so this means that you're probably not going to get a lot of things done, but that's probably it's going to add some relief to Democrats, knowing that they at least can check the power of the president a little bit. Derek, good to see you. Glad I could be here to watch your stream. Hope all is well with you and your family in Kansas. Well, thank you very much. Tanky Town 81. This decision only applies where impeachment and conviction have not occurred and the executive branch of the political opposition considers criminal charges. Yeah, but we've seen impeachment be pretty horrendous. The process is just not working very well. So I think that's the fear that people have. Biased Spurs fan. Mr. Beat, you sparked my interest in politics, civics back in 2019 as a freshman in high school, and now I'm halfway through my poli-sci degree. Thank you very much. That's awesome. Great to hear that. Hey, Mr. Beat, why wasn't Samuel Alito on your worst SCOTUS justices list when Thomas was? Just because Thomas was worse. He did make my dishonorable mention list, if you see in the description and pinned comment of that video. So he's worst 15 for sure. Dumbo Unchained. I appreciate what you do, man. Oh, yes, I got to do this in an Australian accent. Always excited to learn new things. I can't do Australian accent. I'm sorry. With each upload, sending love from Aussie. Thank you so much from down under. That's awesome. Wow. And Fire Tower, please give more attention to judicial philosophy. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you got pragmatism, which is I'm a big fan of, where it's like case by case and keeping in mind that the times change. You got originalism, which supposedly is looking at how laws were originally supposed to be interpreted when they were passed, when considering them in the present. I'm really oversimplifying this stuff now. Those are the two big ones that people bring up a lot. But yeah, maybe I should just make a whole video on that because we need to get through all these. Okay, so the next case I wanted to go over was City of Grants Pass v. Johnson. All right, this is the restrictions on the homeless. So this is another 6-3 ruling. The 6 right-leaning justices ruled against a series of laws in Oregon aimed at preventing homeless people from sleeping and camping outside, people experiencing homelessness. A ruling that they did not violate and it ruled that these laws that prevented people from sleeping and camping outside did not go against the 8th Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. And so precedent of this was Robinson v. California, 1962, that criminalized people going through homelessness, but it was actually indirect because it was actually people being addicted to narcotics. In that case, the court said that it did go against the 8th Amendment. In this case, essentially you had people that were camping, people that were experiencing homelessness camping in certain Oregon cities. And so these Oregon cities passed laws saying you can't do this. People argued that, well, Johnson is the name of the person who fought this, but Johnson argued that this is punishing people who are already really struggling, and therefore cruel and unusual punishment, therefore going against the 8th Amendment. The court said, screw homeless people. No, they didn't say that, but they said that this is something that local governments could do. They essentially passed the buck on this one, like they've been doing often in recent years, saying the Constitution does not let the federal government like us step in and make a decision on something like this. The majority of people, as you can see, according to SCOTUS poll, think that banning homeless people from camping outside, even when local shelters are full, violates the Constitution. So this is an unpopular ruling. What do you think? What is your unfiltered opinion of the Heritage Foundation? I mean, they've done a lot of damage. I think they've influenced Project 2025 quite a bit, actually. They were a lot of the folks that, a lot of the architects, from what I understand, are from the Heritage Foundation, and they've gone downhill in recent years. If you were to ask me the same question 20 years ago, I would have been more sympathetic to them. So, yeah. All right, so that was the restrictions on the homeless case. The case is called City of Grants Pass v. Johnson. I put links to all these cases in the description if you want to learn more about them. I'm just giving overviews of them. Again, these are 10 of the 62 cases, decisions that I think are probably the most important, but I'm going to bring up others that you suggest as well. No, I think it's worth. I mean, like, it's one thing, Sean, I'm sorry, I need to put Sean's comment up here. He has a good. Where'd you go, Sean? I think it's you're bringing up the Warren Court must be ruled exactly as bad. I think this is an apples and oranges opinion. Sure, you can disagree ideologically with the Warren Court and that they were abusing their power, because yeah, they did expand the Earl Warren almost certainly expanded the power of the Supreme Court. However, I think the difference is now is like they're not even expanding the power of the court so much as like on purpose. It's accidental. I think they're just causing chaos and confusion. they are not even ideologically consistent. If you look at the two biggest controversial cases that I brought up earlier, they are contradictory. That is the problem. Like, you need to be consistent with your rulings, and therefore, if you're not consistent, I'd rather you be ideological than partisan. It comes across as more partisan, as more just obstructionist than anything. Whereas the Warren Court, they clearly were ideological. They clearly were like wanting the country to move further to the left. So I think it's an apples and oranges comparison. Chaos Confusion 2024. Okay, next case I want to focus on, looks like on the list I've got Fischer v. United States. Make sure I spell this right. There it is. It's the obstruction charges for January 6th assault. So I'll just read the details on that. The Supreme Court sided with a rioter involved in the Capitol attack on January 6, 2021, a ruling that prosecutors may not use a federal obstruction statute to charge him. Basically, okay, well, before I break this down even further, this is a states' rights issue versus the federal government issue. Because a lot of the cases against President Trump are actually federal cases. Almost all of them are federal cases, federal charges. So as far as recent rulings on the subject, in 2015, the Supreme Court limited the sweep of the statute at issue in the case. It's called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, writing for 4 of the justices in the majority, warned against cutting the law loose from its financial fraud mooring in the case that involved Florida fishermen who had thrown undersized fish into the Gulf of Mexico. What was at stake? The case has the potential to affect the federal case against former President Donald Trump for plotting to subvert the 2020 election, as well as hundreds of other January 6 prosecutions. But the decision's precise effect on those other cases was not immediately clear. Where does the public stand? Think of the events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6 were criminal. 71% say yes. 29% say they were not criminal. So just to give you, I think we need more details on this one. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this story here. Oh, this is paywalled. So, all right, I'll go to the this one here. Oh, yes. So more background on the case. On January 6, 2021, while Congress was convening, I mean, a lot of you know this stuff already, but I'll read it anyway. While Congress was convening to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election in favor of Joe Biden, thousands of supporters of the losing candidate Donald Trump converged on the U.S. Capitol to disrupt the proceedings. The Trump supporters swarmed the building, overwhelming law enforcement officers who attempted to stop them. The chaos wrought by the mob forced members of the Congress to stop the certification and flee for safety. Congress was not able to resume its work for 6 hours. You had 3 dudes who were 3 of the rioters indicted for various offenses related to their involvement on January 6th. All 3 were charged with felony offenses of assaulting, resisting, or impeding certain officers, and misdemeanor offenses of disorderly conduct in a Capitol building and in restricted grounds involving the intent to disrupt congressional sessions and government functions. Additionally, each faced a count of obstruction of an official proceeding. The defendants challenged this obstruction charge, claiming that the statute does not prohibit their alleged conduct on that day. The district court agreed, holding that the statute does not apply to assaultive conduct. Blah, blah, blah. So the big question was, which prohibits this law? I forgot the full name of it again, but does this law, which prohibits obstruction of congressional inquiries and investigations, include acts unrelated to investigations and evidence? All right. So to go back to how the court decided, the court said no, it's a separate thing, and they sided with the rioters. And what's interesting with this case, this is one of those examples where Amy Coney Barrett sided with the left-leaning justices, and Brown Jackson, actually a left-leaning justice, sided with the right-leaning justices. So again, a lot of times you cannot predict this stuff because they don't decide. These justices don't always decide how you think they will based on how they have in the past. It's always fascinating. They're a less political branch of government, so they are somewhat more immune from, for lack of a better word, they're not as affected as much by by politics. So it's always interesting. We're not going to go into the opinions that were written by the majority and the dissent, but just know that also many cases, as with every term, many cases were unanimous. All 9, despite their political leanings, agreed 100%. This happens much more often than you think. Much more often than you think. Oh, E for every gamer. Ian, thanks for doing that. Should Biden step down? In my opinion, yes, he should step down. Not because he's old, but because he is not very good at communication. Is he not very good at communication because of his age? Probably, yeah. But that's besides the point. He can barely talk. That matters when you're the president of the United States. That's one of your main jobs as president, is to be able to talk, is to be able to be an effective communicator. Sean, thank you. We should replace substantive due process with privileges and immunity doctrine. Thomas is completely correct with his assessment. I disagree. I'm not going to get into it right now, but if you were to do that, you need to understand the implications of that. You're overturning thousands of cases in one fell swoop, essentially, leading to chaos. That's not how reality works. You might as well burn the whole thing down and start from scratch, which is maybe what Thomas wants to do. I don't know. I don't know what he wants to do. I mean, maybe we should follow the money. That might help us learn what he truly wants to do. Oh, I appreciate that. Well, the main one I'm looking at today, Ian, is actually free. But I appreciate that. Yeah, I hate how New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, they're all paywalled. And people that really should be reading this stuff are not able to read it because I usually go to different sites to kind of get around the paywall, but it doesn't always work. Don't tell anyone that I just said that. Okay, the next case on the list that I think of the most important cases of this term, Rahimi v. United States. This was a Second Amendment issue, United States versus Rahimi. This was the one that should have been unanimous, but it was 8-1. Clarence Thomas being the only dissent. The Supreme Court ruled that a federal law that makes it a crime for people subject to domestic violence restraining orders to own guns does not violate the Second Amendment. In other words, it makes it so that if you have a restraining order against you, there can be laws that prevent you from getting a gun, and it doesn't go against the Second Amendment. So it was 8-1. Again, Thomas was the only dissent. There's not a whole lot of Second Amendment Supreme Court cases throughout American history. Most of them have been within the past 15 years, actually, since D.C. Heller. It does mention the 2022 case, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, in which the court struck down a New York law that put strict limits on carrying guns outside the home. So this case is actually a shift in the other direction, going back to kind of turning away from the Second Amendment. And most of the public agrees with the court in this case, 74%. What was at stake? It was the court's first statement on the scope of a major ruling it issued in 2022 in terms of Second Amendment rights. That earlier decision, Bruin, vastly expanded gun rights and has left lower courts in turmoil. Oh, that's a common trend in recent years. Lower courts in turmoil as they struggle to hunt down references to obscure or since forgotten regulations. Yeah, essentially, it's like a lot of these decisions are just making it so that people can't do their jobs in government anymore or do them very easily. That's brilliant to do. I will take that as advice as well. It's kind of slow, though, isn't it? Do you think, Christian, thank you again. Do you think Marbury v. Madison was correct in giving the Supreme Court judicial review ability? The big question. What would they do otherwise without that ability? Okay, I understand that question. I would say no. I think that we want as many checks and balances as possible, and I think it's good to have a strong Supreme Court, because without Marbury v. Madison, we would have a very weak Supreme Court that had essentially very little power at all. And so I do like the fact that case set that precedent, made it clear that the Supreme Court does have the power of judicial review, which if you don't know what judicial review is, watch my Marbury v. Madison video. That's the most important Supreme Court case of all time. But it says that the court has the power to declare any law or action of a government official unconstitutional, saying, no, we're just going to take whatever law Congress passed or whatever action a politician did or a government official did and say, you can't do that and you can never do it again. Just like that. Just like that. Snap of a finger. I think it's quite an impressive power, but again, you want as many checks and powers as possible, because if you have one part of government getting too powerful, then that's what leads to authoritarianism. We don't want a dictatorship. Okay? I know you think you want a dictator. No, you don't. No, you don't. And a lot of you are like, oh, no, I don't want a dictator. I don't want authoritarianism. You say you don't. But what you really care more about is economic freedom. That's what you really care about. And so you're willing to sacrifice political freedom in the name of economic freedom. Stop it. Just stop it. We want both political and economic freedom. Both distinct freedoms. So remember, it's not always worth it to have 100% economic freedom if you have no political freedom. A lot of people are okay with dictators. They really are. It's really kind of pathetic, but that's how human beings are. Still alive again. Dr. Littman says that for Dems to win the election, either Biden has to stay or he has to give up the presidency and allow Harris to be president. Thoughts? Yeah, no, I think he stresses a lot the importance of incumbency, which Harris would cover. Also, he needs to, I think he often forgets that Trump is also an incumbent. And so you can throw that, they cancel each other out in this case. So the incumbency is very overrated in 2024. You shouldn't even bring it up because they're all incumbents. And so if you're going to say, oh, well, Trump, he's an incumbent, so he will have the better, like if Kamala Harris is the nominee instead of Joe Biden, then Trump will have the advantage of incumbency. Well, no, because he hasn't been in there for the last 3.5 years. And so, but Kamala Harris arguably has been in there. She's been oftentimes alongside President Biden at cabinet meetings behind closed doors. Vice presidents don't really have much to do other than just kind of absorb everything around them. And she's been around. It's not like she's just been chilling at home the whole time. So I think she's basically just as incumbent as Trump is what I'm trying to say. Thoughts on the executive order creating Schedule F? I will look into this. I have no idea what you're talking about, but we need to move on. So I will look into this later. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Okay. The next case we're going to look at is Murthy v. Missouri. I had somebody in the chat earlier say they just gave a speech on this, apparently. This is another very important case, in my opinion. Disinformation on social media. This was a 6-3 ruling, but interestingly, you had three right-leaning justices side with 3 left-leaning justices, including the aforementioned Amy Coney Barrett, as well as Brett Kavanaugh and Chief Justice John Roberts. The Supreme Court handed the Biden administration a major practical victory, rejecting a challenge to his contacts with social media platforms to combat what administration officials said was misinformation. Basically, this was a situation in which you had, okay, I always got to pull this up because I want to make sure I get the facts right. But okay, so you had multiple plaintiffs, including doctors, epidemiologists, consumer and human rights advocates, academics, media operators, and yes, federal agencies and officials that they were basically talking trash about conservative-leaning speech, specifically on denying the 2020 election and also denying like mask and vaccine efficacy, specifically vaccines. That was the big one. Masks, as we now know, masks is more controversial than we originally thought it was. COVID-19 origins even, and just election integrity itself. Basically, a lot of people online spreading information. And so you had a bunch of others step in and request that Twitter and other social media platforms take this misinformation down. Well, on the flip side of this, the states of Missouri and Louisiana said you can't do this because that goes against free speech of the First Amendment. And so, long story short, this went to all the way up to the Supreme Court. The big question was, did the federal government's request? Yeah, it was really specifically the federal government getting involved, saying, "Hey, you need to take down that misinformation." But again, remember, it was a request. They weren't forcing them to take it down; they were asking them. So the question was, did the federal government's request that private social media companies take steps to prevent the dissemination? Why do they use these big words? Dissemination of purported misinformation transform those companies' content moderation decisions into state action and thus violate users' First Amendment rights. Okay, let me just translate that. Does the federal government asking Twitter to take down misinformation translate to people feeling pressured not to post this information at all and thus going against their First Amendment rights? Well, the court said no. They said they sided with the federal government, and most of the public agreed with them, saying this did not go against the First Amendment because you're not forcing these people to not say it. They're just asking. However, there's still a lot of gray area here, and so I understand. Like, we'll probably see more cases like this involving, the spread of misinformation, because I think a lot of people forget that the First Amendment is not absolute, that there are certain exceptions to free speech. If your speech clearly hurts other people, then it can be restricted. And so that was another thing that the Supreme Court considered with this case, for sure. Hi, Mr. Beat. If you were a senator back in 1931, would you still vote for the Star Spangled Banner as a national anthem or another? I personally always loved America the Beautiful the most. Between those two, absolutely, I side with you, Ridge. I would definitely. I think America the Beautiful is a better song. It's a little bit cheesy, but so is the Star Spangled Banner. So, yeah, I think as far as today, I don't know, Party in the USA, maybe. I don't know. I do have a 4th of July playlist. I could go through that and say there's a lot of I think Pink Houses by John Mellencamp would be an excellent national anthem. Pink Houses is pretty good. Or This Land Is Your Land by Woody Guthrie, maybe. Yeah. All right. I haven't checked out the regular comments here. Let me see what you're saying here. Making up COVID origin and mass vaccines are bad, hurt people. Yeah. You can make that argument for sure. Hustle Bones by Death Groups. The new national anthem. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get back on. I got to get through my 10 cases here. I told my family I would get this done by 6 p.m. Central. So we're moving right along to the next case that I think was one of the most The top 10 most important Supreme Court decisions of this term: FDA v. Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. Also known as the abortion pills case. Okay, so this was a unanimous ruling. Again, I want to point out that this happens more often than you realize, that the court can get along and agree on a lot of issues, big issues too, like this one. The Supreme Court upheld recent FDA, Food and Drug Administration, for those of you who don't know, guidelines for distributing a commonly used abortion pill by mail and telemedicine, finding that the plaintiffs did not have standing to sue. So let me go back to the details on this one. This is a little bit more obscure. So Food and Drug Administration v. Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. Okay, so we're talking about specifically medication abortion in the United States using a combination of mifepristone and misoprostol. I'm horrible at pronouncing drug names. Forgive me. Both approved by the FDA. Blah, 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 blah. Flash forward to the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization decision, which eliminated the right to an abortion. Several states sought to restrict mifepristone's sale. Sorry again. And the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine and other anti-abortion groups sued the FDA, claiming inadequate consideration of evidence in terms of that this would be something that did not go against the Jackson v. Dobbs decision. In April 2023, a federal district court judge sided with the plaintiffs, suspending the FDA's approval. So yeah, people forget that. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit partially stayed this decision. So a lot of people were predicting that the Supreme Court would just go with the lower courts on this. The big questions were, number one, do respondents have, are they able to challenge the FDA's actions approving mifepristone, this birth control or abortion pill, approved conditions of use? Two, were the FDA's approvals random, or were they actually clear and backed by science? And three, did the district courts properly grant preliminary relief? So that's just more of like a dealing with procedural crap. Okay, I don't want to get into the weeds too much with this, but long story short, the court unanimously sided with the FDA. And 68% of the public, apparently, according to the SCOTUS poll, agrees. The ruling ensures, for now, full access to the drug. For now, this is a narrow decision, which means they're only talking about this specific drug, the specific set of circumstances here dealing with this drug when the FDA. But it does not unravel restrictions on the pill in more than a dozen states that have passed near total abortion bans since the court overturned Roe v. Wade. So in other words, some states, it's harder to get this stuff, or you can't get it at all because they have stricter laws. So this is just basically saying, hey, this is a state-by-state situation in terms of getting these abortion pills. Let's make Bushrod Washington's Chief Justice. He should have been. Poor Bushrod. Poor Bushrod. Okay. The next case is... Oh, did I skip over Garland v. Cargill? Let me see. Did I already do that one? I can't remember now. No, I didn't. Garland v. Cargill. This is the bump stocks for guns case. 6-3. Again, this is a ruling that appears to be ideological or partisan. 6 right-leaning justices ruling on the same side. The 3 left-leaning justices on the other. The Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration overstepped its bounds, though they actually ruled against Trump, because remember, Trump had a ban on bump stocks. bump stocks, gun attachments that increase the ability of a semi-automatic weapon to fire more bullets at one time. If you're forgetting how this whole thing got started, back in, what was it, 2017 or whatever, the Las Vegas mass shooting, the horrific mass shooting in Las Vegas where the guy was up from his balcony. It was one of the most disturbing events in American history. Just shooting his gun with these bump stocks, plowing down dozens of people at this concert in Las Vegas. If you want to learn more about that, check out The Cynical Historian. He's done a couple of videos on it. That's his hometown, Las Vegas. So he looked into it quite a bit. But yeah, that led this whole thing where you had more people calling for more gun control, particularly even Republicans were saying, okay, yeah, we can have these bump stock bans. And when Trump approved of this, a lot of Republicans actually were more pro Second Amendment turned against him. But yeah, ultimately the Supreme Court said, yeah, Trump, you went too far. Actually, the Second Amendment actually does protect bump stocks, gun attachments for semi-automatic weapons. And so, this was another case that actually had to go back and look at laws passed a long time ago, including the National Firearms Act of 1934 and Gun Control Act of 1968. A lot of times you're getting into the nitty gritty in terms of like, okay, what exactly can these guns do? There's a related article here as far as like, what is a bump stock and how does it work? I don't know much about bump stocks. You can probably tell by the way I'm saying it, but this is just simply put another win for the Second Amendment, just further strengthening the Second Amendment, even though we had that other case that weakened the Second Amendment somewhat. That was the case right up here, the United States versus Rahimi, which actually limited gun rights a little bit by saying if you have a restraining order against you, you're not able just to go get the gun. There can be laws against that. So yeah, contradictory a little bit here. There's nuance. But overall, the bump stocks for guns case, Garland v. Cargill, did strengthen the Second Amendment. Well, hey, Nathan. I appreciate that. How do you feel John Roberts is doing as Chief Justice? Rank him out of 10. 10 being the best. He's, in my opinion, he doesn't really stand for a whole lot. He seems to be just somebody who's trying to make everybody happy, trying to find a balance when it's hard to find a balance. I think he, from what I understand, he's more of somebody who he likes the position very much. He likes the attention he gets from it, but at the same time, he's not so much like as passionate about the maybe some of the more ideological things. I think he's less ideological than some of the other Chief Justices. So I think he's probably average, mediocre. I think this last, if it would have been before this last term, I would have said maybe 6 out of 10, maybe 7 out of 10 even. Now, maybe 4 or 5 out of 10. I think he's down there because like I keep saying now, there is more chaos and confusion because of this court. They're making it so that all the other courts in the country now have a much more difficult job. The executive branch now has a much more difficult job. The legislative branch has a more difficult job as well, but maybe they need a more difficult. Maybe this is going to lead to better things for the legislative branch, which is, I think, is what John Roberts and the rest of the right-leaning justices ultimately want. They want the legislative branch to be great again. Instead of saying "Make America Great Again," they want the make Congress great again, make Congress functional again, because Congress has been so dysfunctional for so long. The only reason why they're able to pass anything is these giant omnibus bills that get through and where everybody gets a little bit of something they want so they can go back home to their constituents and say, hey, I did this for you. I got you that bridge built. I got you that military base. Ha, ha, ha. And then that's how they get reelected. And it just kind of leads to more I mean, less real legislation getting passed that actually has broader effects, in my opinion. Gouda, thank you. Fix the court. Which justices do you want to represent you? Your vote is divided between choices. Judges use votes as a weight. A 5-4 decision. Decide which 4 judges wins if they have more weight. All right, that's a good, simple way to put it. I would say, like, are you asking me to, like, which judges I want to represent me? I don't know. I'd have to think about that more. I will say I have very nuanced views about all these justices. The only 2 I have clear opinions on that I know for sure are Alito and Thomas. I just think they're bad justices. The rest I'm fine with overall. Cohen, thank you. How would you realistically reform the court? I think you could have term limits. You could expand, or you could also expand the court. Term limits, I would say, maybe, I said this in my amendments video. I go back and forth, but anywhere between like 20 or 18, maybe 18-year-long terms, and all the way up to like maybe 25. Do it on an odd year, perhaps. Yeah, those are the 2 things I always say. I agree with you, Cohen. Can Congress disband a court or remove justices? Absolutely. They can impeach a justice. They've only impeached a Supreme Court justice once in American history, and that justice got to keep his job. But it can happen theoretically. Like, I would have, if we had a much different looking Congress, we probably would have had Clarence Thomas impeached. But because Republicans control the House, and you just need more people against Thomas to begin with. And you don't have that in Congress right now. That's why you haven't seen him impeached. Nathan, again. Sorry to get political on his Supreme Court video. Well, of course, everything's political practically. So don't worry. No apologies needed. But I'm becoming more and more nervous by the day about the upcoming election and what it may mean for our country. How are you feeling? Yes, I am. To be honest with all of you, I am a little nervous. I'm not so much worried about Trump, which is weird to say. I'm worried about the people around him. Some of the people that he may put in power that just kiss his butt. And because they kiss his butt, he's like, oh, yeah, I like you, and you can help me out. And then they're like the authoritarians. That's what I'm afraid of. I don't think Trump himself even cares about being an authoritarian. I think he just cares about his own, fortunes mostly. And he doesn't want to go to prison. So, but the thing that scares me the most is that this time around, he might go after it's likely he would go after his political rivals. That to me is authoritarian crap. Like he's going to go after anyone who went against him. Now you could say, well, Biden's doing that to him. Well, no, he's not. Biden has nothing to do with all of these charges against Trump. Cope if you don't believe me. Okay. You need to prove it. There's no evidence that Biden is responsible for any of these charges against Trump currently at all. We've all seen Biden. He can barely keep it together as it is. So I think these are all independent cases. And yeah, are they political? Absolutely. These are political attacks against Trump. No doubt about it. It's naive to say otherwise. However, to say that, oh, Biden is going after his political enemy, well, you need to prove that if you're going to say something like that, prove that he actually was aware of all this stuff. Because if he really was, like, maybe he would have not had classified documents in his own residence as well. I just think that you're giving Biden too much credit. Like, I think there's a lot of other people that also don't like Trump, and they're going after him. So, but I am worried about Trump wanting to get political revenge. I think he might take it too far if he gets back in. But maybe I'm a little too worried. Maybe I'm getting too upset about this. But you already know that I'm not the biggest fan of Trump. However, Trumpism, I think overall has been a net positive on this country in terms of bringing populism, helping it come back, which it needed to come back. We were long overdue for populism. Populism can be a very good thing to move the country in a different direction if the concentration of power is so concentrated that people are really suffering, which we've seen. Extreme wealth inequality has made it that way. So I think populism needed to come. Trump somehow brought it to the Republican Party. I'm still waiting for it to come to the Democratic Party. Is there somewhat. When you say dark Brandon, that's usually what we're talking about is more populist leaning policies or populist adjacent policies. Anyway, too much on that. Don't live your life in fear. We'll be fine. The Republic is going to be fine. We're about to 250 years as a country here in a couple of years. I think we're going to make it. Yeah, we're going to be fine. Joseph, thank you. If Donald Trump wins a second term, do you think he will appoint Judge Eileen Cannon? Oh, Cannon, yeah. To a SCOTUS seat should one open up, given her favorable rulings towards him in his documents case. Yeah, I've seen her name come up. I think maybe, yeah, but I mean, there's lots of possibilities. I mean, however, it's really important to bring this up that a lot of appointees by Trump, so federal judges that were put there, nominated by Trump, have turned against him, who have ruled against his favor. I think that's important to bring up. A lot of people don't bring that up much. I think we need a lottery system for SCOTUS appointments. Take it out of the hands of politicians. I mean, anybody can be a Supreme Court justice. There's no requirements listed in the Constitution, so why not? Why not? Still alive, is still here. Thank you. Do you have any idea how your fellow Nebraskans are feeling about this upcoming election? Are they feeling just as nervous as you? I'm in Kansas now, but up in Nebraska, I was just talking to my friends who still live in Omaha. I know that Omaha is probably going to vote for the Democratic nominee. If it's Biden or Harris or someone else. That's the way. Now, they gerrymandered it, so it may be still very close, but that's a very blue city in a red state. So I don't know if they gerrymandered it enough to weaken Democratic support there. That's all I can say. Oh, I already read that one. Here we go. Oh, hey, watch your language there. I'll just read your comment. Your profile name is inappropriate, young man. Hey, huge fan, but I absolutely disagree on your view that Trumpism has been a net positive. I think the political polarization has been awful for. Okay, that part of it has been, I agree with. I'm not talking about that part of it. I'm talking about he's helped turn the Republican Party become more anti-war, at least like rhetorically. He's helped the Republican Party call out corporate welfare for the first time. I think he's raised awareness about things that the Republican Party neglected otherwise to raise awareness about, such as border security. I think that's good that we're getting much needed reforms with border security. But overall, yeah, I mean, I disagree with Trump's policies, most of them. Yeah, they are mostly reactionary. And he is a demagogue. He is a con artist. So don't get it twisted. I just think that we needed to go through this in order to come out better as a country. I do. And you see a lot of former Trump fans are now turning not to Biden, but to RFK Jr. To me, that shows that there is a large swath of the American populace that is not being heard, but they feel like they're being heard by RFK Jr. And if you look at your average RFK Jr. fan, they are not only anti-vax, they are also just generally anti-establishment. And the establishment has been pretty crappy towards most Americans for a while. We needed that. We needed a movement to question the entire system, because the entire system has been rigged. Okay? As George Carlin once said, it's a big club and we're not in it. Okay? So tapping into that is a good thing. Does that mean we need to destroy the entire system, burn it all down? Absolutely not. We need to learn from history and reform the system. We don't need to have a new constitutional convention. We don't need to destroy the entire departments of government. I still firmly believe we can reform the government. So sorry if I upset you, Viper. Ian, thoughts on the ICC going after Hamas Israel government? ICC, what does that stand for? International Criminal Court. Oh yeah, no, I think it's. I think they need to get involved. Yeah, definitely. Good to see you here, Ian. By the way, I hope you're doing well. Good luck going to college here. You enjoy your last summer of freedom. Nathan, again, last chat tonight. 2 questions. What is populism and how did Trump bring it back? Populism is just actually, listening to what the majority of people truly want. There is this strain of elitism that runs through every government on the planet throughout world history that, oh, hey, the people in power, we're the ones who really know how to do things. And we just need to downplay the what ordinary people actually want. But I think from time to time, you need to really listen to what ordinary people are going through. And I felt like for most of my life, ordinary people are not being heard from. We saw this like with all of the Rust Belt cities that have been destroyed in my lifetime. Rural America is in decline. We've seen stagnant wages overall, and the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. We've seen rising house prices, education prices, healthcare costs, childcare costs. And now recently with inflation, everything is more expensive and stagnant wages wages are going up under Biden, but Biden has nothing to do with that. But regardless, it still hasn't, the wages have not gone up enough. I think that if you think things are going well, you need to like really look around you, get out of your neighborhood. Maybe you are privileged. Things are not going well for many Americans. They're just getting by. Until we can all collectively admit that, then no, I mean, that's why populism is a good thing, because it's bringing reality back into the faces of politicians. So Trump is a demagogue. He's a con artist, but he said, drain the swamp. That's what got him elected in 2016. Because at least he was like paying attention to some of this stuff, even if it was just lip service, even if he was lying about what he was going to do, even if he didn't do anything to solve the problems. At least he was bringing attention to it. That's what I mean when I say Trump brought it back. I hope that makes sense for you. Also, how do you think the U.S. should prepare for a Trump term, positively or negatively? I mean, just continuing to weaken the power of the presidency. Who will be Trump's VP? Would you support Newsom? I don't know. I mean, I would support anyone who could beat him. I think probably Tim Scott will be Trump's VP is my prediction lately. Firestorm, your opinion on SCOTUS since Trump loaded it with right-wingers eroding our liberties? Also, what is your opinion on Project 2025? I'm going to do a podcast about Project 2025, so I'll let you know that in the near future. I think some of it is sensationalism. Some of it is rooted in reality. So just keep that in mind. To answer your other question, I mean, if you just go back to the beginning of the rest of this stream, that will that will answer that for you. Thoughts on the 2024 Libertarian candidate, Chase Oliver? I like him. He seems like a great dude. He's young. He's like younger than me, which means he probably has no chance. But yeah, seems great. I just, he's not going to get elected, unfortunately, in our current system. The odds are all stacked against him. Mira, 2 things. One is that Trump used to be a slumlord. Yeah. And has been fired by attorneys that just did like him for it. Yep. 2, do you think that companies have more to do with rising costs, or is it the Fed? The Fed is partially to blame, but it's only, I used to think it was more to blame. The more I learned about them, the more I realized they want stability more than anything. And so oftentimes that means like really doing whatever they can to fight inflation. As we've seen the past 3 years, they have done so much to fight inflation. I think the reason why inflation has gone down has largely been because of the Fed. But to address the company's part of it, yeah, there's also price gouging going on. It's been going on forever, really, but it's been particularly bad. It's partially to blame for the recent inflation. To just blame the president for inflation, that's pretty stupid. The president does not control inflation. I'm making a video about this, actually. It should come out in October, I'm hoping. Okay, we're caught up on Super Chats. Now let's get to the rest of these Supreme Court cases. So we've got two more to go through, I believe. Yes, two more. Alexander v. South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP is the next one. It's a racial gerrymandering case. All right, another 6-3 ruling. These are very familiar, right? The right-leaning justices on one side, the left-leaning on the other. In this case, called Alexander v. South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP, that's a mouthful. The Supreme Court cleared the way for South Carolina to keep using a congressional map that had been deemed an unconstitutional racial gerrymander, reversing a lower court ruling that said the map resulted in the, quote, bleaching of African-American voters from a district. Yeah, this one really upset me, and most of the country is against this as well. And this is one of those cases yet again where they are passing the buck, saying states should be the ones making decisions on this. Racial gerrymandering or manipulating political boundaries to favor one group with a certain skin color. That was technically banned with the Supreme Court case Shaw v. Reno in 1993. However, they're also looking at other things here. I'm going to pull this one up on the full case here so I can get a better. So the background of this case. After the 2020 census, South Carolina's Republican-controlled legislature adopted a new congressional map that moved tens of thousands of black voters to a different district, effectively making the district a safer seat for Republicans. The South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP sued. A 3-judge panel concluded that the district was indeed unconstitutional because it was racially gerrymandered. The legislators appealed directly to the Supreme Court. And the court, the big question was it racially? Well, actually, I better read this because this is a little bit different. Does the South Carolina's legislature's redistricting map, which has the effect of moving tens of thousands of black voters to a different district, constitute an impermissible racial gerrymander, even if the legislator's purported intent was merely a political gerrymander? So they sided with South Carolina. So this would be Alexander as the president of the South Carolina Senate. So they found that race predominated in the design of South Carolina's first congressional district, but that was clearly erroneous. So it's racial gerrymandering and vote dilution holdings are reversed. So basically, they're saying it was accidentally racially gerrymandering, and so it didn't go against Shaw v. Reno, and it was fine. It just kind of it worked that way. Also, I'm going to point this part out. The 4 experts whose testimony the plaintiffs proffered and on which the district court relied on are flawed because they, quote, ignored certain traditional districting criteria, such as geographical constraints and the legislature's partisan interests. Further, the plaintiffs failed to provide a substitute map that shows how the state, quote, could have achieved its legitimate political objectives while producing significantly greater racial balance. Obfuscation is what it kind of seems like to me. But yeah, I was not happy with this case. Another bad decision by the Supreme Court. Boo. Okay. Again, that's my opinion. Make it clear that that's my opinion. So the last case I want to look at here, and then we'll bring up ones that you guys brought up. Trump v. Anderson. This is another one of the Trump cases. This one was the one about his ballot eligibility. Okay, this was a unanimous one. So you may remember that Colorado tried to get Trump off the ballot because he was a criminal or a alleged criminal. But this was nonpartisan, And all of the court said, oh, no, you can't do that. He has to be on the ballot. The Supreme Court ruled that states may not bar former President Donald Trump from running for another term, rejecting a challenge from Colorado under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which prohibits insurrectionists from holding office. So the idea is that Trump incited the violence on January 6th that prevented the peaceful transfer of power. Therefore, under the 14th Amendment, Colorado said, hey, he can't run for president, so we're leaving him off the ballot. And this goes back all the way to when the 14th Amendment first passed. So during Reconstruction era, and even going back to an 1869 decision from Chief Justice Salmon Chase, but in terms of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. But just overall, like, this is something that hasn't been looked at too much because go figure, you haven't had a president or somebody running for president that has been accused of being an insurrectionist before. Go figure. That's not something that typically happens. But what was at stake? A decision that Mr. Trump was ineligible to hold office would have been a political earthquake altering the course of American history. I agree with this case. I think the court got it right. I'm glad they did. However, it's important to note that 47% of people polled from SCOTUS poll regarding this specific case said Trump is not eligible. So that shows you the clear political divisions here, even with something that is, the court itself is unanimous on. There's another case that there's a couple cases that have already been brought to my attention that I'll bring up that I didn't mention in my 10. We have Linkey v. Freed. This is an interesting case where James Freed created a private Facebook profile that was originally intended to connect with family and friends. Eventually, he grew too popular for Facebook's 5,000 friend limit on profiles. So Freed converted his profile to a page which has unlimited followers. So now he's a public figure. In 2014, Freed was appointed city manager for Port Huron, Michigan. So he updated his Facebook page to reflect his new title. On his page, he reflected both personal updates about himself, but also directives and policies he initiated in his official capacity. Another guy named Kevin Lindkey came across Freed's page and did not approve of how Freed was handling the pandemic. Oh boy, that just tore our country apart, didn't it? He posted criticism of Freed in response to Freed's Facebook page, and Freed deleted the comments and ultimately blocked Lindkey. So Lindkey sued Freed for violating his First Amendment rights by deleting his comments and blocking him. He's a public official. You can't just delete my speech at you. Went all the way to the Supreme Court. The question was, when does a public official's social media activity constitute state action subject to the First Amendment? Unanimously, the court voted with Lindkey, the guy who was blocked on Facebook by the public official, saying, hey, a public official who prevents someone from commenting on the official social media page engages in state action. And they give these specific requirements, blah, 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 but it says, hey, long story short, you can't do that. State officials, you should be able to, if you're speaking out against a public official, your speech can't be hurt. All right. So anyway, that's an interesting case. Yeah, it's an important one. I'm glad you brought it up to me. The other case that I needed to bring up from a super chat, I believe, was Moyle v. United States. So we'll look at that one real quick. Whoop. Oh, where did it go? Dang it. There we go. Was it this one? Here we go. Moyle rules. Okay, Moyle v. United States. In August 2022, after the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which eliminated the right to an abortion, the Biden administration brought a legal challenge to a restrictive Idaho abortion law. Okay, yeah, this case. Yes, I'm aware of this one. The Biden administration argued into the state law, which criminalizes providing an abortion except in a few narrow circumstances, including to save the life of the mother, is preempted by a federal law, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. And this law requires hospitals receiving Medicare for funding to offer, quote, necessary stabilizing treatment to pregnant women in emergencies. the district court ruled in favor of the Biden administration and barred Idaho from enforcing its law to the extent that it conflicted with the EMTALA. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, sitting in en banc, declined to stay the district court's ruling while the state appealed. So the big question was, does the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act preempt an Idaho law that criminalizes most abortions in that state? The court said, make sure I get this right. Said no. Or it said yes. Said the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act did preempt the Idaho law. Looks like this was 6-3. The dissenting justices were Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch. But this was a narrow decision. So this something that was, I'm not going to read this whole thing. I don't want to put you all to sleep here. Okay, so Justice Kagan said the federal law requires hospitals to provide abortions in certain health emergencies that Idaho's law goes against, creating a clear conflict. So federal law preempts state law. That's the short of it. Am I missing anything here? I didn't research this one much before, so. Oh, pure curiam, everyone agrees. That's what that means. Thank you, Pete Sue. Okay, yeah, so looks like they got some more super chats here. I want to... yeah, now I can put your name up on the screen. Okay. Oh, I'm glad I didn't upset you. Fair enough. Fair enough, big fat viper. All right, Sean. Luther v. Borden, the political questions doctrine established due to a legit war in Rhode Island. What the heck? Let's check this one out then. All right. Thanks for bringing it to our attention, Sean. Oh, is that not a case from this year? Luther v. Borden. We're getting... is this a case that... Oh, this is a 1849 case. Okay, I've not heard of this one. Interesting. Okay. Well, here, let me just bring this up. Thank you for educating us. In 1841, Rhode Island was still operating under an archaic system of government established by a royal charter of 1663. Rhode Island, come on. The charter strictly limited suffrage and made no provision for amendment. Dissident groups protesting the charter held a popular convention to draft a new constitution and to elect a governor. The old charter government declared martial law and put down the rebellion. I had no idea about this. Holy crap. The time Rhode Island went to war with itself. One of the insurgents, Martin Luther, brought suit claiming the old government was not, quote, a Republican form of government and all its acts were thereby invalid. I need to make a video about this. Holy crap. Wow. Talk about an obscure case that is actually seems like it's really important. All right. Well, thanks for bringing that to our attention, Sean. Alex says, if Trump really did cause an, quote, insurrection, then isn't it obvious to charge him with insurrection? Why sensationalism about this the past few years? I agree that, like, you can make an argument that he incited violence, but even that's really hard to do. And so, yeah, like, I mean, that's why I think Colorado got it wrong. That's what I was saying earlier. I agree with you on that. Heat vision. Thank you. Do you think Congress should decrease Ukraine aid? Well, my understanding is Ukraine is just getting our leftover weapons. And so, in my view, I don't think that's quite as bad. However, generally, I think that our aid should be primarily humanitarian. That's probably the best way to go for any aid across the planet. And so, yeah, I'm a bit conflicted on this. I think that decreasing military aid to Ukraine kind of makes more sense. However, I also think Vladimir Putin and his regime is really horrible and dangerous for the world. So, yeah, it's a tough one. I don't want us to go to war with Putin. I don't want things to escalate with NATO. So, I think humanitarian aid should be the focus. There you go. All right. So I think I'm going to wrap it up because it's been almost 2 hours, but I highlighted 12 of the 62 cases that the Supreme Court looked at. Overall, I'm not that happy with this court. And in previous years, if you've seen these streams, I've done these in recent years where I just kind of recap the term of the Supreme Court. And I'm usually one of the first people to defend the court, to say, hey, people are overreacting. This time around, I'm more sympathetic to the people that are going crazy about the Supreme Court. I understand. I still think there's a lot of sensationalism. Like when you see Legal Eagle, if you see his latest video saying we're effed in the thumbnail, I don't think we're effed. I don't think it's over yet, but I do see a lot of chaos and confusion. I see lots of instability in the court systems and a lot of scrambling in the other branches of government, especially the executive branch. I'm worried about some disarray with government agencies just trying to do their jobs. They're good people for the most part, just trying to do their jobs. Like I'm sure all of us know at least one person who works for the federal government. They're not an autocrat. They're not somebody who's trying to abuse their power. They're not tyrannical. Okay. They're just, doing their jobs and they care about the country. So I think I'm more skeptical towards the thing I am worried about the most is giving the president too much power. We should be weakening the power of the presidency, in my view. So that is something that definitely, I do agree that people should be concerned about it. Yeah, just be careful with like all these people saying, oh, the president's now a king. Biden can just assassinate whoever he wants. I know a lot of people are being facetious. They're not serious, but still just be aware that there's a lot of hyperbolic language and people are freaking out, and maybe they shouldn't be freaking out that much, but do be concerned. And yeah, be aware that when you're voting for president in November, you're voting for someone who's going to nominate a Supreme Court justice next term. Be definitely aware of that. Oh, well, thank you, Kyle. I try to be. Yeah, I mean, like, it helps that I'm cynical against the entire system generally. I'm also an independent. I clearly lean to the left. I did a political test, a series of political tests a couple of years ago. I'm sure my views have changed a little bit since then. However, I used to be very right-leaning when I was younger. I was very far right, and I was, well, not far right, but I had a very conservative upbringing, and I've always had libertarian sympathies. However, as I've gotten older, my views have become much more pragmatic and all over the place, really. So that also helps that I don't really have much of an ideology. But thank you, Kyle. I try. I'm very biased, though. I try not to be biased. We're all biased. George Carlin, such a great philosopher. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank you for being here. Again, check the description of this video for links to information about these cases. There's a lot more information that I left out because I was just trying to get through a lot of stuff and break it down as quickly as I could. But I realize a lot of this stuff is difficult to understand. So I will continue to make my Supreme Court Briefs series. And even though those videos don't do very well, but I'll continue to make them because I think it's important that you learn them. Mrs. Beat always wants me to promote my book. I guess I'll put a link to this as well. I wrote a book about the Supreme Court. And if you want to learn about 100 of the most important Supreme Court cases or decisions in American history, boom, they're in here. I put them in here. Although the last 3 years, pretty important decisions. So I may have to update this book here sooner than later. Thanks for being here. You're an awesome person. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Bye-bye.